On the 13th of January 1208, Peter of Castelnau, an envoy of Pope Innocent III, stood before Count Raymond VI of Toulouse. The papal legate reprimanded the count and his vassals for not taking action against a heretical movement that had gained root in their region, the Languedoc. Count Raymond did not respond well to this chastisement, not only refusing to take any actions against the heretics, but threatening Peter's life. The day after, while travelling along the Rhône River, a mounted spearman attacked Peter of Castelnau, killing him. This murder became the spark that ignited the First Crusade fought against fellow Christians, which dragged out into a 20-year conflict which exacted a death toll on a genocidal scale. Welcome to our new series on the Albigensian Crusade, the most brutal religious war of High Medieval Europe. In the first episode, we'll cover the initial clashes of the conflict, the brutal Massacre of Béziers, and the Siege of Carcassonne. The heretic movement targeted by Pope Innocent III was Catharism, a divergent Christian sect which was prominent in the Languedoc region, in what is now southwestern France. Catharism was heavily influenced by the Bulgarian Bogomils, a Christian neo-Gnostic sect. It took root in Western Europe in the first half of the 11th century, and by the 12th century had found a solid stronghold in the Languedoc, particularly in the city of Albi, which is why followers of Catharism were also known as Albigensians. According to the Gnostic or dualist worldview of the Cathars, a good god had created the spiritual world, while an evil god, ergo Satan, was responsible for the creation of everything material. Thus, the ultimate goal of Catharism was to escape the boundaries of the flesh and rejoin in purity the spiritual realm of creation. A minority of the Albigensians, known as perfects, practiced these tenets to the extreme, living a life of total poverty, simplicity, and carnal abstinence. However, the majority of Cathars, simply known as believers, took a looser approach to the sect's teachings, attracting new proselytes amongst farmers, city artisans, and even some feudal lords. At the start of the 13th century, the local Catholic clergy and the Papacy were increasingly worried about the Cathar presence in Languedoc. Not only did the Albigensians openly defy established dogmas of Catholic doctrine, they were steadily growing in numbers. They were garnering support from the local aristocracy. This was due to several reasons. Firstly, Cathar priests and bishops demanded relatively low tithes and taxes, making them a preferred alternative to Catholic clergy in the eyes of local landowners and noblemen. Secondly, several members of the aristocracy, especially women, had converted to Catharism, some of them even living as perfects, which meant that the sect had influential spokespeople at the highest level of Languedoc society. Finally, feudal lords and barons in Languedoc chose to offer protection to the Cathars for political reasons. From an administrative and military perspective, the local nobility of the Languedoc owed their allegiances either to the kingdoms of France or Aragon, at least in theory. In practice, Languedoc aristocrats and common folk alike were very protective of their own culture, language, customs, and thriving economy. Protected by the mighty walls of their castra, or fortified cities, they behaved largely independently from their powerful neighbours. Thus, offering protection to the Cathars, or at least refusing to persecute them, was also a matter of protecting their lands against the interference of kings, popes, and other barons in central and northern France. In the first decade of the 13th century, tensions rose to a boiling point as Pope Innocent III grew increasingly antsy in his desire to crush the heresy in the Languedoc, while northern barons and knights were also chomping at the bit, seeing an anti-Cathar crusade as an opportunity to expand their territories at the expense of the southerners. All of this came to a head on the 13th of January 1208, when papal legate Peter of Castelnau threatened with excommunication the most powerful amongst the southern pro-Cathar leaders, Raymond VI of Toulouse. The assassination of Castelnau prompted Innocent III to issue a call for crusade against the Albigensian heretics. The Pope initially asked the French king Philippe Augustus and his son Louis to take leadership of the expedition. Unfortunately for Innocent, the French crown refused to participate, as they were preoccupied with the ongoing conflict with King John of England and the Angevin Empire. However, King Philip did allow many of his feudal lords to join the crusade with their retinues of knights and foot soldiers. These units were joined by large numbers of routiers or mercenaries and ribauds, improvised and ill-equipped crusaders motivated by the Pope's promises of spiritual salvation. According to Innocent's call to arms, Crusaders only had to serve 40 days in the struggle against the heretics in order to gain full indulgence for their sins. Moreover, they would be allowed to maintain any goods plundered in battle. This was an attractive offer to the lords of northern France, since from their perspective, the concept of loot extended to any territorial gains they could carve out in Languedoc. These advantageous conditions attracted huge columns of soldiers, which assembled in Lyon on the 24th of June 1209. According to the chronicler William of Tudela, the Crusaders amounted to 20,000 fully armed knights and a staggering 200,000 foot soldiers. More realistically, however, the entire Crusader army never grew larger than 20,000 overall troops, and this number constantly shifted over time as contingents joined and left following the 40-day rule. The sizes of the southern or pro-Cathar forces throughout the Crusades are also hard to estimate, as several lords frequently switched sides according to their own interests. After the initial assembly, Papal legate Arnauld d'Amaury led the Crusaders southwards, following the path of the River Rhône. On the 2nd of July 1209, the column reached Valence, where the first switch of allegiances took place. Here, Count Raymond VI of Toulouse, once a fiery opponent of the papal legates, pledged allegiance to Aumery and asked to join the crusade. The march resumed until Montpellier, where another local nobleman came forward asking to join the fight against heresy. His name was Raymond Roger Trencavel, the 24-year-old Viscount of Béziers and Carcassonne. The young Viscount admitted to the papal legate that his lands contained many Cathars, but that he had never supported them. Callously, Arnauld d'Amaury ignored his pleas and informed Trencavel that the church would neither show him nor the city of Béziers any mercy. His hand having been forced, Viscount Trencavel then hastily rode back to Béziers to organize his city's defenses against the oncoming Crusader army, ordering the city militia to defend the bridge on the River Aube, deepening the city's defensive ditches and closing its gates. He then left for nearby Carcassonne to seek reinforcements. However, before the Viscount could return, on the 21st of July, the Crusader army arrived in front of the city walls. Settling in for a siege, the noblemen, knights, and the better-equipped men-at-arms set up camp on a sandy plain southwest of Béziers' citadel, at a safe distance from possible enemy sorties. Meanwhile, the mercenaries and poor crusaders set up their tents by the river, closer to the city gates. Initially, the crusade host tried to negotiate, using the Bishop of Béziers as an intermediary, who urged the citizens to surrender. In response, the people of Béziers replied that they would rather be drowned in the salt sea than concede the Crusaders a penny worth of their possessions. This defiance was born from the fact that the defenders believed that the mighty walls and ditches of their city would hold off the attackers for longer than the 40 days of military service required by the Pope. However, not everyone behind the city walls was interested in waiting the Crusaders out. In the early hours of the 22nd of July 1209, a band of impatient young Béziers militiamen sallied forth from the portcullis, attacking the unimpressive Ribourg camp and clashing with a group of mercenaries on the bridge over the Aube. Awakened by the screams, the leader of the Ribourg ordered an immediate assault on the city, which was joined also by the Routiers' mercenary units. In the ensuing melee, some of the mercenaries were able to fight their way into the city before the gates could be closed, and proceeded to climb onto the city walls, engaging with the guards on the fortifications. The mercenaries then rampaged through the streets of Béziers, killing and plundering unopposed. Hundreds of citizens sought refuge in the Saint-Nazaire Cathedral and other churches, but the mercenaries spared no one, murdering even women and children and members of the clergy. Finally, the Crusader knights took notice of the commotion and decided to enter the fray. Trying to impose some discipline, they prevented the mercenaries from plundering further. But they did little to curb the massacres. According to Caesarius of Heisterbach, the knights asked Legate Omeri how they were going to tell the Catholics from the Cathars in Béziers, to which the legate replied, "Kill them all. The Lord knows who are his own." And so they did, slaughtering 1,000 citizens inside Saint Mary Magdalene Church alone. The knights then proceeded to confiscate the loot from the ribot and the mercenaries. In protest, the poorer ranks set fire to several timber buildings in the city. In a matter of hours, one of the main pro-Cathar centres in Languedoc had fallen, while an unknown number of Cathars and Catholics, probably well in the thousands, had been put to death. Emboldened by their victory, the Crusaders then moved on to their next objective, the city of Carcassonne, 80 kilometers southwest of Béziers, where they would square off with the Viscount Trencavel. Leadership of this siege would be assumed by a northern nobleman and veteran of fighting in the Holy Land, Count Simon IV de Montfort. Like Béziers, Carcassonne boasted impressive walls and defensive measures, but it had a considerable weakness in that its main water supply was the River Aude, some 400 meters from the city's perimeter. On the 1st of August, the Crusader army swiftly surrounded Carcassonne, cutting the defenders off from the river. 2 days later, the invading Catholics launched their first attack against the Bourg, an unfortified suburb west of the main city. Knowing that this suburb was impossible to defend, the Viscount Trencavel had already had it evacuated. Subsequently, de Montfort's men were able to storm and burn the Bourg within 2 hours. From there, they proceeded to attack another detached suburb to the north, the Castelnau. This area was protected by ditches and high fortifications, from which the defenders hurled stones and shot crossbow quarrels at the attackers. The Crusaders responded by building an array of siege engines to flush out the Cathars. First, mangonels were constructed, designed to hurl rocks along a low angle against the city's defences. Next, Montfort ordered the building of a cat, a mobile wooden tower draped in fireproof animal hide, which protected footmen and sappers as they approached the walls. On the 8th of August, the besiegers succeeded in breaching the walls of the Castelnau, storming in and pushing the defenders back into the main city. However, Count de Montfort only left a small force guarding the Castelnau, which prompted Viscount Trencavel's men to stage a counterattack. A sortie from within the walls of Carcassonne successfully set the Castelnau on fire before retreating back into the city. After this engagement, an impasse followed, with the Crusaders unable to break through the walls of the main city, while inside the city, the defenders were suffering the consequences of heat, dehydration, and dysentery. Nominally, the Trencavel family and Carcassonne owed allegiance to King Peter II of Aragon, and naturally, the sovereign was not happy that an army of northern Frenchmen was rampaging through the lands of his vassals, so he decided to mediate the situation. The king offered to Viscount Trencavel a deal devised by the papal legate Omeri. According to the terms, Trencavel and 11 of his followers would be spared. Everyone else in Carcassonne was to be killed. Naturally, the young Viscount rejected the offer, and fighting resumed. De Montfort's soldiers proceeded to attack the walls of the main city. First, they filled the ditches with bundles of wood, before trying to scale the walls. The defenders repelled the assaults by raining down bolts, stones, and even boiling oil over the Crusaders. As time wore on, de Montfort realized he needed to conclude the siege quickly. The 40 days of service were coming to an end, meaning the bulk of his host would be free to walk home with a papal indulgence. However, time was also running out for the defenders. Inside the walls, Trencavel's forces realized they could not hold out for much longer, as the water supplies were dwindling and dysentery was rife amongst citizens and soldiers. On the 14th of August, Raymond Roger de Trencavel entered the enemy camp for another round of negotiations with the Count of Nevers and Legate Aumery. They offered to spare the citizens of Carcassonne, Catholics and Cathars alike, provided they left the city immediately, carrying no possessions with them. The Viscount agreed to the offer, thus sparing his city from destruction. He himself would not be so lucky, as Aumery had him incarcerated. Trencavel died of dysentery later that year. In less than 2 months, the Crusader army had conquered 2 powerful strongholds of the pro-Cathar forces. Subsequently, Carcassonne, well positioned and well defended, would become their headquarters for the rest of the campaign. However, not all was peachy for the invaders, for they were now facing a leadership problem. Arnauld Aumery had to appoint a unified military leader for the crusade, but with the 40 days of service almost elapsed, most noblemen and knights were eager to return home. Powerful aristocrats such as the Duke of Burgundy refused the appointment as commander of the Crusaders, wary of the risks of victory as much as those of defeat, as acquiring lands in Languedoc would likely put the Duke on a collision course with the Kingdom of France. Eventually, long-term leadership of the Crusader army fell upon the man who had led them to victory at Carcassonne, Simon de Montfort. A capable tactician and devout Catholic, de Montfort would rise as the main military figure of the first part of the Albigensian Crusade. Throughout the rest of 1209, Montfort led his armies through Languedoc, conquering castrum after castrum. Despite the numbers of his army dwindling due to the 40-day rule, the Northern Count and the Crusaders were preceded by a reputation for military superiority and ruthlessness, earned at Béziers and Carcassonne. In a matter of weeks, Castres, Fongeau, Puy-le-Roc, Mirepoix, Saverdeux and many other castres opened their gates to the Crusaders, offering a token resistance at best. Even the city of Albi, one of the initial hotbeds of Catharism, pledged allegiance to the knights from the north. This flurry of easy victories proved a double-edged sword for Montfort, as he was forced to leave part of his army behind to garrison each newly conquered castrum, leaving him in a position of progressive weakness against the southern lords, whose fierce and vengeful resurgence was on the horizon. In our upcoming videos on the Albigensian Crusade, the Crusaders will face their first setbacks, atrocities will escalate on both sides, and the Kingdom of Aragon will enter the fight. This is episode 1 of our member and Patreon exclusive series on the Albigensian Crusade. In total, our kind members and patrons got 5 episodes on this topic, and their support allows us to continue creating videos and paying living wages to our team in a YouTube space where ad revenue is extremely volatile. If you want to see the rest of the series on the Albigensian Crusade, as well as more than 160 other exclusive videos, including ones on the Russo-Japanese War, Punic Wars, Pacific War and more, as well as get access to our exclusive Discord, see our schedule, and get early access to all videos, join the ranks of our patrons and YouTube members via the links in the description and pinned comment. Thanks to our supporters for allowing us to continue doing our dream job. Our videos would be impossible to produce without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links down in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.